Hey, it's Don again. Thanks for joining me again. I'm out here with the Jeep, and today I'm going to sand the entire tub down to bare metal and primer it again. No, I'm not. That would be crazy, and I've already done it like 10 times, so I'm not going to do that again. What I am going to do, as promised, is I'm going to tear into the front end a little bit, see if I can get my tie rod and my drag link installed. I'm going to see if I can get my hands on some disc brake calipers and get my front discs put back together. And I did, in kind of rummaging around and cleaning up the garage, I found one last piece of body part that's still maroon. What it is the bottom part of the door hinges. Those go up on the front of the tub and they just kind of bolt through the side of the tub. So I've got the outer part of that, and the inner plates have the bolts where I had to drill those out of the old firewall to get them off of there. So I've got to drill those out and see if I can get a screw extractor in there and get those out so I can put new bolts in there. So a lot to do. Let's get after it and see what we can get done this week. Okay, here's the highly scientific results of my drip test. I left a paper towel on the floor underneath the differential cover, and other than a little spot or two where I had initially wiped it off, it's clean. No drips, no leaks. Okay, bear with me. I'm obviously not an artist, but I want to explain this process of doing basically a tape measure alignment so that I can figure out the distance that I need to have on these between my steering knuckles to get my alignment done. So basically what you're trying to accomplish here is you're trying to make the front end of the tires point slightly towards each other if you're looking straight down over the top of the tires. And when I look in my builder's Bible here, it says you're basically looking for a 1/16 of an inch to an 1/8 of an inch of toe in, meaning the front of the tires from some fixed point on the tread to that fixed point on the other tire should be slightly less distance than that same fixed point on the back of the tires. So basically all you do is just pick a point on the tread, you measure the front distance between those 2 points on each tire and the back distance, and you just want to make sure that you're slightly closer together at the front of the tire than you are at the back of the tire. And again, the measurement we're shooting for is basically roughly an 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch. So that distance is going to be smaller at the front of the tires than it is at the back of the tires. Okay, well, I'm just going to illustrate a point here. If this was my tire that I was using to do my tape measure alignment with, all I would do is I'd probably use this inner part of this rain groove here. Nice straight line there. And I would measure from this inner part of the rain groove on this tire across to the same complementary inner groove of the tire on the opposite side of the car. And I would measure that on the front of the tire about halfway up and on the back of the tire about halfway up. And those two distances would be where I'd be trying to get my 1/8 of an inch to a 1/16 of an inch difference between the front of the tire and the back of the tire. Okay? So let me now show you the challenge we have on the Jeep. Okay, so here we are with our Jeep tire, and as you can see, this is going to be a little bit of a challenge because there's definitely a lack of straight rain grooves and so forth. I mean, the tread pattern is just all over the place here. So it's going to be a challenge because if I were to say pick this point of this lug right here, I would have to make sure that as I'm measuring across to the other side, this same pattern of lug is the same height off the ground over on the other tire, or these aren't going to line up properly. So any of these lug points that I pick, I'm going to have to make sure that the tire on the other side is basically has rotated to the same relative position. It might be a little bit easier if I come out here and I use one of these outer lugs. They're straighter. The problem I have with them is you can see I'm kind of having to hold the tip of my tape measure here just due to the curve of the tire, the curve of the face of the tire. So this isn't really going to be a one-man job. I'm going to need a little bit of help. I'm going to have somebody on one side kind of holding the tape measure in place while I go to the other side and get my measurements done. So I'm going to have to come back to this when I've got some help. So once I do get to the point where I can get my measurements made, then I'll be able to measure the distance between my steering knuckles here, and that will give me the distance that my tie rod needs to be. And then I basically am just going to try to make the threaded ends of both tie rods be roughly equal and get them to that rough length and install them in there, and I'll have my rough alignment all ready to go. So everyone was busy today, and I've been trying to figure out how to make my two-person job of measuring the toe in on these tires be a one-person job. Suddenly, inspiration. Yes, I've had these two pieces of angle iron around from my first failed attempt to hang the tent up against the garage roof. And if you've watched even one of any of my previous episodes, you know that the one thing I have plenty of is bungee cords and ratchet straps. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm just going to hook one of those pieces of angle iron to the side of the tire with a bungee, and then do the same on the other side. And then instead of trying to measure to points on the tread, I'll just measure to my angle irons. Brilliant. Okay, so it takes a while to figure out when you're moving in the right direction, when you're moving in the wrong direction. But ultimately, this worked out quite well, and I got my measurement where I wanted it. So then it was just a matter of getting down on the steering knuckles. And what I'm doing is I'm measuring from the center of each hole across to get my fixed length to the center of my tie rod ends. And what I'm going to do when I'm actually measuring on the tie rod is I'm going to measure on the top of it, or in this case, what would be the bottom, I guess, where the grease zerts go, because the grease zert is basically in the center of the flat kind of pan head of the tie rod end. So that's my reference point. And I think in this case, I was shooting for 42 inches, 42 and 5/8 of an inch between those two. So you got to remember, one of these sets of bolts on the lock bolts on the tie rod spins one direction and one spins the other direction, so that when you're turning your tube in the middle, you're either making the distance bigger between the two tie rod ends or smaller. But once you get that figured out, then you just measure and turn and measure and turn until you get it where you want it. And then I'm just kind of hand tightening my first lock nut down and calling it good and getting ready to install it. Well, I have my tie rod and my drag link installed. There's a couple things I wanted to share with you. First of all, as you can tell, this is quite a bit bigger in diameter than the original. And so the clearance between the tie rod and the leaf spring is pretty minimal here. So what happens is when you're putting this tie rod in, you have to kind of bring it underneath and bring it at an angle and push the tie rod end up through the steering knuckle here. Well, I started on this side over here where my two holes are for my tie rod and my drag link, and I got that one in, okay, because I could tilt the tie rod end way up and kind of go in underneath. So I get over to this side, and the tie rod is pressing against the leaf spring, and I was able to get just a really bit of a shallow angle on there, or a steep angle, and I was worried that I wasn't going to get that tie rod end bolt to go up through the steering knuckle here. So I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to get that bolt through the knuckle right there, okay? Well, as it turns out, again, as with most of this Jeep stuff, it just takes a little patience and a little messing around. Now, what I thought I was going to have to do was I thought I was going to have to back off my U-bolts there to get some more distance to allow the leaf springs to droop down. You don't actually have to, okay? You can get it in there, you just have to finesse it a little bit. And then what I did next is I took my square and I laid on my back under here, and I put the square against the tie rod, and I basically tried to make my steering box pitman arm be straight. I just kind of eyeballed it, straight between the center of this bolt and the center of where my hole was for my drag link. So what I was trying to do was I feel like I've got the tires pointed pretty much straight. So I wanted to have this in the middle of its throw. So this throws either left or right, depending on which way you're turning. So I wanted to have that straight in the middle and get my length on my drag link right, so that I was all pretty lined up in the middle. Now, of course, this is going to an alignment shop when it's all said and done, but for roughing everything in, those were my, basically what I did it is, again, I have my angle irons taped or bungee corded to my wheel. That's what I'm measuring for. So I do have my 1/8 of an inch gap smaller at the front than at the back. So that got my length set properly for my tie rod. And then I lined up my drag link or my pitman arm to the center of its throw, and then used that length to set my drag length. So you can see these are my lock nuts. I don't have those locked yet, so I could still turn this a little bit and, you know, change the distance. Not worried about tightening it up yet. I got it all in there. It went pretty well. These do not have the cotter pins through them yet, nor do I have my greasers on the bottom. But I did just want to show you that, you know, it actually went quite well, and I couldn't really show it to you while I was doing it, so I thought I'd show you after the fact and just tell you about the little things I bumped into. So as always with tie rods, I think it always feels like the bolt on the tie rod end that goes up through the steering knuckle is not going to either come all the way down out of there, or it's not going to be able, you're not going to be able to get the tie rod low enough to go up in. But trust me, I was just simply holding onto the end of the tie rod here and just wiggling it around, and I was able to get that bolt up through there, that tie rod end up through the steering knuckle. Okay, so have patience and it will go. So I'm going to go see if I can find me some brake calipers and turn my attention to the brakes on this front end, and see if we can do that next. Okay, well, with the front end all finished up, so I've got to deal with these door hinges, and the plates that this plate I'm putting in the vise right now is the inner plate. So this goes on the inside of the tub, and a screw goes through the tub, through the outside hinge, through the tub, and into this plate. Now, I had to drill these out. I drilled through the head of the screw on the outside of this thing to get them off of the old Jeep. So now I'm left with this piece of a bolt that's down inside of the hole that doesn't want to come out of there. So I've soaked these things quite a bit in PB Blaster, and now I'm going at them with a screw extractor. Now, if you've never used a screw extractor before, the concept is pretty simple. The success rate is mixed. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but you know, all you can do is give it a try here. So what I'm doing is I'm just going into the point where I had already kind of started to drill into these bolts, and I'm just continuing to drill a deep, small hole down into as close to the center of these bolts as I can get it. And then you basically take your screw extractor, which is kind of a backwards threaded high temperature steel or high tempered steel device, little kind of almost looks like a reverse drill bit. And you just start to kind of screw this thing down into that hole. And what happens is you're screwing it backwards, so as it bites into that bolt, it's going to start to back the thing out. If it's going to come out of there, it'll come out. Now this one, that I'm working on here came out with the first try. The second one, I had to go back and drill a bigger hole so I could use a bigger screw extractor, because the one I was using felt like it was about gonna break off on me. But at the end of this process, I did get all 4 of these backed out of here. It took a little drilling and a little working, but you can see that, with that patience thing and perseverance and a little bit of stubbornness mixed in, you can usually get these things out. So once I got all 4 of these little bolt stubs out, then I grabbed up my little 2-inch grinder sander thing and tore into them to clean off the old rust and the old paint. So you can kind of see a before and after of this inner backer plate and the final product for all 4 pieces. All right, well, we got it. So there's my door hinge and the inner part that the bolt bolts into. One slight challenge that of course we're going to have is these are beveled head recessed bolts. I think they were like a starter head or a Torx head or something in there. So since I'm going to have to replace those because I had to drill them out, I'm going to have to shop around and find me some new beveled bolts for that. I could not find disc calipers this week. Well, I found them. They're in Denver. I gave up on Quadratech. I'm still going to have to track those guys down because I still think they charged me for them and I haven't got them. But I just went to Napa and they've got them in Denver. They should be here on Wednesday. So can't do the front brakes, but you saw how the rest of the front end went. I think good. Got a good amount of stuff done there. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, and next time we come back around, it will probably be brake time, and if it is, then I'll do those back brakes. I know I've been putting those off for a long time. The other thing I'm planning on doing is cleaning up all the stuff that I got kind of stacked in the tub here and getting that seam sealer and attacking the seams around this inside of this tub so that can set up and cure. And there we go. So I think this is a good place to leave it for now, but thanks for watching and don't go anywhere because I think we've got some interesting stuff to come yet.